Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most iconic and powerful films ever made in Hollywood history. We are talking about Gladiator, the year 2000 masterpiece that shook the entire world of cinema, brought the Roman Empire back to life on the big screen, and reminded everyone what true cinematic greatness looks like. So sit back, relax, and let us go through every single detail of this legendary film from top to bottom. Overview. Gladiator is a 2000 epic historical drama film directed by Ridley Scott and written by David Franzoni, John Logan, and William Nicholson. This is not just any movie. This is a film that redefined what a big-budget historical epic could and should be. The film was produced as a joint venture between DreamWorks Pictures, Universal Pictures, Scott Free Productions, and Red Wagon Entertainment. DreamWorks handled distribution in the United States, while Universal Pictures took charge internationally. The screenplay was inspired by Daniel P. Mannix's 1958 novel Those About to Die, and what makes this production even more remarkable is the sheer commitment to historical authenticity. Ridley Scott hired several historians as advisors because he wanted to portray Roman culture more accurately than any previous film had ever attempted. The film was made on a budget of $103 million and went on to earn an extraordinary $466 million at the worldwide box office, making it the second highest-grossing film of the entire year 2000. It was not just a commercial success. It was a cultural phenomenon that completely revived the historical epic genre in Hollywood, a genre that had been largely absent from mainstream cinema for decades. The film runs for a total of 155 minutes, and every single minute of that runtime is filled with purpose, emotion, spectacle, and storytelling of the highest order. Ridley Scott crafted a world so vivid, so textured, and so immersive that audiences felt as though they had genuinely been transported back to ancient Rome. Plot details. The story is set in the year 180 AD and begins on the frozen battlefields of Germania, where Roman general Maximus Decimus Meridius, a man of Hispano-Roman origin played by Russell Crowe, leads the mighty Roman army to a decisive and crushing victory against Germanic barbarian tribes. This opening battle sequence is one of the most extraordinary pieces of filmmaking you will ever witness. The chaos, the fire, the mud, the sword clashes, and the sheer overwhelming scale of it all set the tone immediately. Maximus is not just a general. He is a leader who fights alongside his men, respected and loved by every soldier under his command, and this opening establishes that fact with absolute clarity. After the battle, the aging Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who is present in the camp, summons Maximus privately and reveals something deeply unexpected. He tells Maximus that he wants him to succeed as the protector of Rome after his death, and that he wishes for power to eventually be returned to the Roman Senate, effectively restoring the Roman Republic. This is a decision made not out of politics, but out of trust, because Marcus Aurelius genuinely believes that Maximus is the only man honest and strong enough to carry that responsibility without letting power corrupt him. However, this private conversation does not remain secret for long. Commodus, the emperor's own son and the rightful heir to the throne, played with chilling intensity by Joaquin Phoenix, learns that his father intends to bypass him entirely. In one of the most emotionally devastating scenes in the film, Commodus confronts his father. Marcus Aurelius tells him directly that he does not have the qualities needed to be a great emperor. Commodus, overwhelmed by rejection, grief, and rage, murders his own father with his bare hands, smothering him in the night. It is a moment of patricide that is all the more disturbing for how quietly and intimately it is portrayed. With his father dead, Commodus immediately seizes power and declares himself the new emperor of Rome. He then orders Maximus to be executed along with his wife and young son back in Hispania, as he knows Maximus is the only person who truly knows the truth about what happened. Maximus is taken by soldiers into the woods to be killed, but he fights back, kills his captors, and escapes. Wounded and feverish, He rides desperately through day and night trying to reach his home in time, but when he arrives he finds that the soldiers got there before him. His home has been burned to the ground and his wife and son have been crucified and left hanging as a warning. Maximus collapses in grief and exhaustion, and is found unconscious in the fields. He is picked up by slave traders and transported across the empire to North Africa, where he is sold into slavery and purchased by Proximo, a former gladiator who now runs a traveling gladiatorial school. Proximo, played by the late Oliver Reed in his final screen role, is a rough but pragmatic man who initially sees Maximus as just another fighter to be used for profit. But he quickly recognizes that Maximus is no ordinary man. Maximus, fighting under a false identity and refusing to reveal who he truly is, proves himself in the provincial arenas with a combination of military skill, tactical brilliance, and sheer ferocity that the other gladiators simply cannot match. His fellow slave and eventual close friend Juba, played by Jimin Hunsu, walks alongside him through this dark period, offering a quiet but powerful bond of brotherhood. Word of Maximus and his growing reputation spreads, and Proximo decides to take his fighters to Rome itself to compete in the Grand Games at the Colosseum. Commodus has announced a season of spectacular gladiatorial games to win over the people of Rome and consolidate his grip on power. He knows that the Roman crowd loves entertainment, and that controlling the crowd means controlling the city. The political intrigue around him is represented through characters like Senator Gracchus, played by Derek Jacobi, who opposes Commodus and quietly hopes for a way to restore the Senate's authority, and Lucilla, Commodus's sister played by Connie Nielsen, who shares a complicated past with Maximus and is deeply troubled by her brother's tyranny. When Maximus enters the Colosseum, something extraordinary happens. The crowd expects to see men slaughtered for sport. What they get instead is a warrior of breathtaking ability who fights not just with strength but with intelligence, precision, and an almost supernatural calm. In the most famous and electrifying scene of the film, after a remarkable display of combat in which Maximus and his small group of fighters defeat a much larger opposing force in a recreation of the Battle of Carthage, Commodus descends from his imperial box to meet this mysterious new champion. He asks Maximus to remove his helmet and reveal his face. Maximus turns slowly, removes his helmet, and delivers the line that has echoed through cinema history. He tells Commodus that his name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the north, general of the Felix legions, loyal servant to the true Emperor Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and that he will have his vengeance in this life or the next. The arena falls into a stunned silence. The crowd then erupts. In that single moment, everything changes. Commodus cannot kill Maximus openly now, because the crowd loves him and Commodus depends on the crowd's approval to maintain power. Maximus becomes the most popular gladiator in Rome, and Commodus begins scheming to eliminate him through other means. He sends assassins. He arranges for Maximus to face increasingly deadly opponents. He even tries to manipulate Maximus through Lucilla, with whom Maximus had a romantic connection in the past. But none of it works. Maximus survives everything thrown at him. Eventually, Maximus connects with Senator Gracchus and Lucilla, and they begin to devise a plan to smuggle Maximus out of Rome with the help of loyal soldiers who served under him, so that he can return with an army and overthrow Commodus. But the plan is discovered. Lucilla is threatened, Proximo is killed, and Maximus is captured and imprisoned. Commodus, realizing he cannot defeat Maximus in the court of public opinion, decides to fight him personally in the Colosseum in front of all of Rome. However, to ensure his victory, he secretly stabs Maximus in the side before the fight begins, leaving him weakened and barely able to stand. The final confrontation in the Colosseum is one of the great climactic battles in film history. Even wounded and bleeding, Maximus fights with everything he has. Despite Commodus breaking the rules of honorable combat and attempting to kill him with a concealed blade, Maximus ultimately kills Commodus in the arena. He dies from his wounds moments after, collapsing to the sand. As he dies, he experiences a vision of walking through golden fields toward the wooden gate of his home, toward his wife and son who wait for him on the other side. His dying wish is honored by Senator Gracchus and the remaining soldiers, who are instructed to free his gladiator companions and return the power of Rome to the Senate, exactly as Marcus Aurelius had originally intended. Maximus dies as what he always was, a soldier and a father, finally at peace. Cast: Russell Crowe plays Maximus Decimus Meridius, the central character of the film. His performance is controlled, powerful, and deeply human. He earned the Academy Award for Best Actor for this role, and it remains one of the defining performances in his career. Joaquin Phoenix plays Commodus, and his portrayal of this deeply insecure, manipulative, and dangerous young emperor is genuinely one of the finest villain performances in Hollywood history. Phoenix gives Commodus layers of psychological complexity that make him frightening precisely because you understand him. Connie Nielsen plays Lucilla, the emperor's daughter and Commodus's sister, a woman trapped between loyalty to her family and her conscience. Richard Harris brings quiet dignity and moral authority to the role of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Oliver Reed delivers a memorable and deeply human performance as Proximo, the gladiator trainer, and this was tragically his final film, as he passed away during production. Jimin Hunsu plays Juba, Maximus's fellow slave and closest companion in the arena, bringing warmth and loyalty to a role that grounds the film emotionally. Derek Jacobi plays Senator Gracchus, one of the few men in Rome still fighting for the principles of the Republic. The ensemble as a whole is remarkable, with every performance serving the story and the world that Ridley Scott built. Release date: The film had its world premiere in Los Angeles, California on May 1, 2000. It was officially released across the United States on May 5, 2000, and reached the United Kingdom on May 12, 2000. The film was a massive box office success right from its opening weekend, quickly establishing itself as the defining cinematic event of that summer and ultimately of that entire year. Principal photography had begun in January 1999 and wrapped in May of the same year. Production was notably complicated by the fact that the script was being rewritten multiple times throughout the shoot, and also by the tragic death of Oliver Reed before filming was completely finished. The production team used computer-generated imagery to digitally complete the remaining scenes involving his character Proximo, a technical achievement that was groundbreaking at the time. The music for the film was composed by Hans Zimmer and Lisa Gerrard, and their score is one of the most emotionally powerful and iconic film soundtracks ever recorded. John Matheson served as director of photography, and the cinematography of this film is breathtaking in its scope, texture, and beauty. Awards and legacy. Gladiator won 5 Academy Awards at the 73rd Academy Awards ceremony, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Russell Crowe, Best Costume Design, Best Sound, and Best Visual Effects. It received enormous critical praise for its performances, direction, visuals, and score. On IMDb, it holds a rating of 8.5 out of 10, placing it consistently among the top 50 films of all time on the platform. The film is widely credited with reviving the historical epic genre in Hollywood, inspiring a wave of similarly scaled productions in the years that followed. It solidified Ridley Scott's status as one of the greatest directors working in Hollywood and transformed Russell Crowe into one of the biggest stars in the world. Decades after its release, Gladiator remains as powerful, moving, and visually stunning as it ever was. It is the kind of film that stays with you long after the credits roll, because at its core, beneath all the spectacle and the battle sequences and the political intrigue, it is a story about a man who lost everything and chose to face that loss with honor. That is a story that will never stop resonating with audiences. The story of Gladiator begins in the cold, gray, and brutal landscape of Germania, somewhere deep in the forests at the edge of the Roman Empire, in the year 180 AD. The Roman army has been fighting a prolonged and exhausting war against the Germanic barbarian tribes for what feels like an eternity, and the soldiers are tired, cold, and desperate to go home. But before they can return to their families and their lives, one final battle must be fought. One final push must be made to crush the remaining resistance and bring the war to its end. And the man responsible for leading that charge is General Maximus Decimus Meridius. Maximus is not the kind of general who sits on a horse far from the fighting and issues commands from a safe distance. He is a man who walks among his soldiers, who knows their names, who fights alongside them in the mud and the blood and the chaos. Before the battle begins, he moves through the lines of his men, calm and steady, looking each of them in the eye, touching their shoulders, speaking to them with the quiet confidence of someone who has done this many times before. The men do not just respect him. They love him. He is the kind of leader who makes men feel that they are not alone, that whatever comes next, they face it together. The battle that follows is one of the most stunning and overwhelming sequences ever committed to film. Maximus gives the signal and the Roman war machine erupts into motion. Flaming catapult balls arc through the dark sky and crash into the forest. Cavalry charges in from the flanks. Infantry advances in tight, disciplined formations. The Germanic warriors, fierce and terrifying, pour out of the trees and crash into the Roman lines in a wave of screaming fury. And in the middle of all of it is Maximus, sword in hand, fighting with a precision and ferocity that is almost frightening to watch. The Romans win. The war is over. And as the smoke clears and the last of the resistance crumbles, Maximus allows himself a single moment of quiet. He kneels down, picks up a handful of the cold Germanic soil, and lets it fall through his fingers. He is thinking of home. He is thinking of his wife, of his son, of the fields of his farm in Hispania where the wheat grows golden in the sun, where the air smells of lavender, where life is simple and beautiful and full of everything that matters. After the battle, the Emperor of Rome, Marcus Aurelius, an old and visibly dying man played with extraordinary dignity by Richard Harris, summons Maximus to his tent. Marcus Aurelius is one of the great philosopher-emperors of Roman history, a man who took power not because he wanted it but because Rome needed him. He is tired now, and he knows that death is close. He looks at Maximus with the eyes of a man who has thought deeply about what he is about to say, and he says something that changes everything. He tells Maximus that he wants him to be the protector of Rome after his death. Not the emperor, but the guardian of a transition. He wants power to be returned to the Senate so that Rome can become a republic again, the way it was always meant to be. He believes that only a man like Maximus, a man of genuine honor and moral strength, can be trusted to carry out such a task without being corrupted by the power it would temporarily place in his hands. Maximus is stunned. He does not want this responsibility. He wants to go home. He tells the emperor as much, honestly and without pretense, which is itself a sign of exactly the kind of character Marcus Aurelius is looking for. The emperor asks him to do this not as a soldier following orders, but as a man choosing to serve something greater than himself. Maximus agrees, reluctantly but sincerely. He will do what Rome needs before he goes home to his family. But there is someone who overhears the nature of this conversation, or at least learns of it. Commodus, the emperor's own son, played by Joaquin Phoenix in a performance of shattering psychological depth, has always known that his father does not truly believe him capable of ruling. He has spent his entire life trying to earn his father's love and approval, and he has never quite managed it. He is not a warrior. He is not a philosopher. He is brilliant in his own way, manipulative and charming and dangerously intelligent, but he lacks the moral foundation that his father considers the most essential quality in a ruler. And now he learns that not only is his father planning to die without naming him emperor, but that he intends to give the responsibility for Rome's future to a general, a soldier of common birth, a man who is everything Commodus secretly fears he will never be. The confrontation between Commodus and his father is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the film. Commodus goes to his father and tries one last time to connect with him, to be seen by him, to be loved by him. He lists the qualities he does possess: his ambition, his cunning, his capacity for love, his desire to be great. And Marcus Aurelius, gentle but unflinching, tells him that these are not enough. That there are virtues more important than those, virtues that Commodus does not have. It is a rejection that goes all the way to the core of who Commodus is, and you can see in Joaquin Phoenix's face the exact moment that something inside him breaks. What follows is not anger. It is something colder and more terrible than anger. Commodus embraces his father, holds him close, and smothers him. He kills him quietly, in the dark, with his own hands. The old emperor dies without a sound. The next morning, Commodus announces that his father has died peacefully and that he, Commodus, is now the emperor of Rome. He knows that Maximus is a threat. Maximus knows the truth. Maximus was promised the role of protector by the man who is now dead. Maximus cannot be allowed to live. Commodus summons him and attempts to get him to swear loyalty to the new emperor, to kneel and accept what has happened and move on. And Maximus, who cannot lie, who cannot pretend, who looks at this young man and sees exactly what he is, refuses. He will not give Commodus his allegiance. He turns and walks away, and in that moment Commodus understands that Maximus will have to be destroyed. Commodus orders Maximus taken immediately and killed before he can act. He also sends soldiers to Hispania to kill Maximus's wife and son, to leave nothing that could serve as a rallying point or a reason for loyalty. Maximus is taken into the woods by a group of soldiers under the command of a man named Quintus, who was once his subordinate. They intend to kill him quickly and quietly. But Maximus is a soldier with extraordinary instincts, and the moment he senses what is about to happen, he acts. He kills his guards, though not without sustaining a serious wound to his side, and he rides. He rides through the night, through the cold, through the pain of his wound, riding as fast as his horse will carry him, pushing through exhaustion and blood loss, because the only thing in his mind is getting home before the soldiers do. He does not make it in time. When he arrives at his farm in Hispania, he finds the fields dark and the air thick with smoke. His home has been burned. And hanging from a wooden cross near the entrance to what was once his home are the bodies of his wife and his son, put there not just to kill them but to send a message, to punish him through them, to make sure that even if he survived, he would have nothing left to survive for. Maximus falls from his horse and crawls to them in the dirt. He is barely conscious from his wound, from exhaustion, from grief. He collapses beside the bodies of his family, his fingers reaching toward them, and he loses consciousness. He is found there by slave traders who recognize a valuable piece of merchandise when they see one. Despite his wound, despite his condition, this is clearly a large, powerful, and physically exceptional man. They load him onto a cart and carry him across the empire, south, into the vast heat and dust of North Africa, specifically to the Roman province of Numidia in what is now Morocco. There he is sold at a slave auction to a man named Proximo. Proximo is played by Oliver Reed, and he is one of the most fascinating supporting characters in the film. He is not a villain. He is not particularly kind either. He is a pragmatist, a businessman, a man who has lived his entire life in the brutal economy of the gladiatorial world and has made peace with it in the way that only someone who has truly seen the worst of it can. He was himself once a gladiator, and he was given his freedom in the arena by Marcus Aurelius himself, a fact that he carries with him quietly and with a kind of reverence he would never openly admit. He runs a traveling gladiatorial troupe, fighting his men in the small provincial arenas of North Africa, making just enough money to keep moving from town to town. When Maximus arrives among his new fighters, Proximo is not immediately impressed. He sees a wounded, grieving, hollow-eyed man who seems to have no interest in staying alive. In the early training sessions, Maximus barely participates. He goes through the motions. He does not eat properly. He does not engage with the other slaves. He is a man who has lost everything and is not yet sure whether survival is something he actually wants. The only person who reaches him during this period is Juba, a tall and gentle man from Africa played by Jimin Hunsu, who was also captured and sold into slavery. Juba speaks to Maximus in the quiet of the night, asking him about the people he sees Maximus reaching for in his dreams. When Maximus tells him about his wife and son, Juba listens with real compassion and tells him that he will see them again, but not yet. It is a small moment, but it plants a seed. It gives Maximus a reason to hold on. When the time comes to actually fight in the arena, something shifts in Maximus. He enters the stand of the small provincial arena with the other fighters for his first bout, and the moment the fighting begins, the soldier in him takes over completely. It is not something he chooses. It is something that lives in him too deeply to be killed by grief. He fights with a speed and precision and tactical intelligence that immediately separates him from everyone else on the sand. He organizes the other fighters instinctively, placing them where they need to be, directing the battle the way a general would direct a military engagement, and the result is a clean and decisive victory. The crowd goes wild. Proximo watches with narrowed eyes and begins to understand what he has purchased. Over the following weeks, Maximus wins fight after fight after fight. He becomes the most talked about gladiator in the provincial circuit. Proximo begins to see something more than just a talented fighter. He begins to see an opportunity. He sits with Maximus one evening and tells him something important. He tells him that he was once a gladiator himself, and that he won his freedom in this very arena, given to him by the old Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He tells Maximus that the secret to winning the crowd is not just skill. It is something more. It is the ability to make them feel something. To not just fight but to perform. To make them love you. And if they love you, you cannot be killed. Even the emperor cannot kill a man the crowd loves. Maximus listens to this carefully. He is beginning to form a plan. If he can get to Rome, if he can get into the Colosseum, if he can get close enough to Commodus, then maybe, just maybe, there is still something left for him to do in this life. Proximo announces that he is taking his fighters to Rome. Commodus has declared a season of spectacular gladiatorial games at the Colosseum, 150 days of entertainment for the Roman people. It is a calculated political move. Commodus knows that the people of Rome do not particularly love him yet. He has not proven himself in battle. He has not demonstrated the qualities that the Roman people admire in their leaders. But he knows that if he gives them entertainment, if he fills the Colosseum with blood and spectacle and excitement, they will cheer for him. And a crowd that cheers for you is a crowd that supports you. He is buying the love of Rome with games, and it is working. When Maximus and the other gladiators arrive in Rome and see the Colosseum for the first time, the sheer scale of it is overwhelming. It is the largest arena ever built by human hands, capable of holding 50,000 screaming Romans, a place where legends are made and men are destroyed for the entertainment of the masses. Maximus stands before it and takes it in, and in his eyes you can see something hardening. He is not afraid. He is focused. He has a reason to be here now. He has something to do. The first great contest in the Colosseum involves Maximus and a small group of fighters who are told they will be playing the role of the Carthaginian army in a recreation of the Battle of Zama, a famous Roman military victory. The implication is clear. They are meant to lose. They are outnumbered, they are supposed to be outmatched, and the spectacle of their defeat is what the crowd has come to see. But Maximus has other ideas. He immediately takes charge of his group, organizing them into a tight military formation, giving each man a specific role, directing their movements with the calm authority of someone who has done this for real on actual battlefields. What follows is not the slaughter the organizers planned. It is a demonstration of military genius. Maximus and his small group systematically dismantle their larger opponents, working together with a discipline and coordination that the crowd has never seen before in the arena. The crowd is on its feet. They are screaming, not in horror, but in absolute astonished delight. They have never seen anything like this. In his imperial box high above the arena, Commodus watches with an unreadable expression. He was not expecting this. He descends to the arena floor to meet this remarkable new fighter, and as he walks toward the dusty, blood-spattered figure standing in the center of the sand, he asks him to remove his helmet and reveal his name. For a long moment, nothing happens. And then the figure turns, removes his helmet slowly, and Russell Crowe's face, weathered and scarred and burning with contained fury, looks directly at the man who destroyed everything he loved. Maximus tells Commodus exactly who he is. Every title, every role, every identity that Commodus tried to erase. And then he tells him what he has come here for. His vengeance. In this life or the next. The arena is completely silent for one extraordinary second. And then it erupts. 50,000 Romans screaming the name of Maximus. Commodus stands there with the full weight of that moment pressing down on him, and he understands immediately that he cannot simply have this man killed. Not here. Not now. Not with 50,000 witnesses who are already in love with him. He has to smile. He has to raise his fist and let the crowd believe that he is in control of this. But behind his eyes, something terrifying is moving. He is going to find a way to destroy Maximus. He just has to be careful about how he does it. From this moment forward, the film operates on two levels simultaneously. On one level, it is the story of Maximus in the arena, fight after extraordinary fight, each one more dangerous than the last as Commodus arranges for increasingly impossible opponents to be placed before him. He fights a legendary champion named Tigress of Gaul, the only undefeated gladiator in Roman history, in a contest arranged specifically to kill him, with tigers released into the arena to complicate the fight further. Maximus defeats Tigress and then does something remarkable. When Commodus gives the signal to kill the defeated champion, Maximus refuses. He spares him. And the crowd loves him for it. It is a direct and public act of defiance against Commodus's authority, carried out in front of 50,000 people, and there is nothing Commodus can do about it without revealing how much it rattles him. On the other level, the film is a political story involving Senator Gracchus, played by Derek Jacobi, who represents the last remaining voice of Republican values in a Senate that has been largely stripped of its power by Commodus. Lucilla, Commodus's sister, is caught in an almost impossible position. She is appalled by what her brother has become, and what he did to their father, but she also has a young son whose safety depends entirely on her maintaining Commodus's trust. She still has feelings for Maximus, a connection from their past that never fully disappeared, and she begins to work quietly and carefully with Gracchus to try to find a way to use Maximus's popularity to bring Commodus down and restore the Senate's authority. They pass messages to Maximus through the slave networks of Rome, and a plan begins to take shape. The idea is to smuggle Maximus out of the city, get him to the legions that were loyal to him, march those legions back to Rome, and use them to overthrow Commodus. It is a desperate plan, full of risks, but it is the only plan that has any real chance of succeeding. Proximo agrees to help, opening the gates of the gladiatorial barracks and giving Maximus the opportunity to escape. But Commodus has people everywhere. The plan is discovered. Lucilla is confronted by her brother, who makes it devastatingly clear that he knows what she has been doing, and that if she ever acts against him again, it will be her son who pays the price. Proximo is killed when soldiers raid the barracks. The other gladiators are captured. And Maximus, almost within reach of freedom, is taken. He is chained and dragged before Commodus, who looks at him with the face of a man who has finally, after everything, gotten exactly what he wanted. He has Maximus. He has won. But Commodus also knows that he cannot simply execute Maximus. The people of Rome love him too much. An execution would cause a riot, would cause questions, would cause problems that Commodus does not want. So he devises a different solution. He will face Maximus himself in the Colosseum. A final combat between the Emperor of Rome and the greatest gladiator who has ever lived. It will be presented as a display of imperial courage and strength, an emperor who is willing to face the best fighter in the empire and defeat him personally. The crowd will love it. And when Maximus is dead, killed honorably in combat by the emperor's own hand, there will be nothing anyone can say or do. But Commodus also has no intention of fighting Maximus fairly. The night before the fight, he goes to Maximus in his cell. He talks to him with the strange intimacy that has always characterized their relationship, this terrible bond between the man who destroyed everything and the man who survived the destruction. And while they talk, Commodus drives a blade into Maximus's side. A deep, wounding blow, designed to weaken him enough to be killable but not so severe that it will be obvious he was stabbed before the fight. He will walk into the Colosseum already bleeding, already dying. The next day, the Colosseum is packed. Every seat filled. Every eye on the sand below. Commodus walks into the roar of the crowd in his gleaming white armor, and then Maximus is brought in, pale and sweating from blood loss, his side bound tightly but leaking through the bandages with every step. The fight begins and it is immediately clear that something is wrong. Maximus is slower than he should be. His movements are labored. He is fighting not just Commodus but his own body, his own wound, his own failing strength. And Commodus, who is a skilled enough fighter in his own right, and who now has the enormous advantage of fighting a wounded man, presses the attack. But Maximus does not fall. He refuses to fall. The crowd is watching and Maximus fights with everything he has left, drawing on reserves of will and strength that have nothing to do with physical conditioning and everything to do with the specific kind of fury that only a man who has lost his family and spent years fighting toward a single purpose can access. He disarms Commodus. He forces him back. And in the chaos of the final exchange, Maximus drives his sword through Commodus. Commodus dies in the sand of the Colosseum, and the crowd is absolutely silent, because no one has ever seen anything like this. An emperor killed in the arena by the man he tried to destroy. Maximus stands there for a moment, swaying, the wound in his side finally overwhelming the last of his strength. He speaks his final words. He asks for the release of his fellow gladiators. He asks for the Senate to be restored to its power, the last wish of Marcus Aurelius finally being honored. He asks for Lucilla to be protected. And then he falls. As he lies on the sand dying, he sees something. Or perhaps he feels it. The vision that has appeared to him throughout the film, the golden fields, the sunlight, the wooden gate of his home. He walks toward it, and this time the gate opens. His wife and his son are there, turning toward him in the warm light. He reaches them. He is home. The people of Rome watch in silence as Juba, his closest friend, kneels beside his body. Lucilla kneels beside him too. She tells the people of Rome that what they are looking at is a soldier of Rome, and that he must be honored as one. His body is carried out of the arena on the shoulders of those who loved him. Senator Gracchus is released from prison. The power of the Senate is restored. Commodus's era of tyranny ends in the dust and blood of the very arena he built to celebrate it. The final scene of the film belongs to Juba. That night, alone in the empty Colosseum, Juba kneels in the sand where Maximus fell and carefully buries the two small carved figures that Maximus always carried with him, the figures of his wife and son. He presses them into the earth gently, the way you would tuck a child into bed. He tells Maximus that he will see him again, but not yet. He stands, and he walks out of the Colosseum, a free man now, ready to find his own way home. And that is where the story of Gladiator ends. Not with triumph exactly, though there is triumph in it. Not with simple revenge, though there is revenge in it. It ends with the image of a man who refused to let grief and loss and injustice turn him into something less than he was, who carried his honor all the way to the end, who kept his promise to a dead emperor and to his own dead family, and who found his way home at last through the only door that was left open to him. Here is the detailed life history of the main actors of Gladiator, 2000. Russell Crowe. Russell Ira Crowe was born on the 7th of April 1964, in Wellington, New Zealand. He came into this world in a family that was deeply connected to the world of film and entertainment, though not in the way most people might assume. His parents, Alex and Joy Crowe, worked as caterers on film sets, which meant that from a very early age, Russell was surrounded by the machinery of movie making, the cameras, the lights, the sets, the actors, and the entire ecosystem of a working production. It was not a glamorous introduction to the industry, but it was a real one, and it planted something in him from the very beginning. When Russell was 4 years old, his family relocated to Australia, settling in a country that would shape him profoundly and that he would come to think of as his true home. He grew up in a household where storytelling and performance were not alien concepts. His grandfather, Stan Weems, was a cinematographer, and that connection to the craft of visual storytelling ran quietly through the family in a way that seems almost inevitable in hindsight. As a young boy, Russell was not immediately the focused and driven performer he would later become. He was a child who loved the outdoors, who was physical and energetic, who played rugby with the intensity that he would later bring to everything else he did. But he was also drawn to performance in ways he could not entirely explain. At the age of 6, he appeared in an episode of a New Zealand television series, making his first professional appearance on screen as a child performer. It was a small thing, barely a footnote, but it pointed towards something. As a teenager, he became increasingly serious about music. He formed a band and genuinely believed for a period of time that music was going to be his primary creative outlet. He played pubs and clubs around Australia, wrote songs, performed with real commitment, and built a life around that world. Music was never just a hobby for Russell Crowe. It was a genuine passion that stayed with him throughout his entire life and career, long after acting became his primary profession. His acting career began to take shape in the late 1980s and early 1990s through stage and television work in Australia and New Zealand. He was doing the hard, unglamorous work of building a craft, taking roles wherever he could find them, learning the mechanics of performance through experience rather than through theory. He appeared in Australian television productions and began to attract attention for a quality that was difficult to define but impossible to ignore. There was something about Russell Crowe on screen that demanded your attention. A weight, a presence, a sense that whatever this person was thinking and feeling was absolutely real and absolutely true. His international breakthrough came with the 1992 Australian film Romper Stomper, in which he played a violent and terrifying neo-Nazi skinhead named Hando. It was a role of extraordinary difficulty and considerable controversy, requiring him to completely inhabit a worldview that was repugnant and alien, and he did it with a ferocity and commitment that shocked audiences and critics alike. People who saw Romper Stomper came away disturbed, unsettled, and deeply impressed. It was not a comfortable film, but it was an unforgettable one, and Russell Crowe's performance was the reason. Hollywood began to pay attention, and over the following years he worked steadily in films that gradually raised his profile. The Quick and the Dead in 1995 gave him a role in a major American production directed by Sam Raimi. L.A. Confidential in 1997 was the film that truly announced him to American audiences at the highest level. He played Detective Bud White, a complex and morally ambiguous cop in a film that was itself an intricate and brilliant piece of work, and his performance was one of the standout elements in an ensemble full of extraordinary actors. The film was a massive critical success, and Russell Crowe was suddenly a name that the entire industry was paying attention to. The Insider in 1999 gave him yet another extraordinary role, this time as Jeffrey Wigand, a tobacco industry whistleblower who risked everything to expose the lies of one of the most powerful industries in America. It was a completely different kind of performance from anything he had done before, quieter, more internal, built from vulnerability and moral courage rather than physical power, and it earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. He did not win that year, but the nomination confirmed what people in the industry were already saying, that Russell Crowe was one of the finest actors of his generation. And then came Gladiator. Ridley Scott cast him as Maximus Decimus Meridius, and the combination of that role, that director, and that particular moment in Russell Crowe's development as an actor produced something genuinely extraordinary. He trained intensively for the role, building a physicality that was imposing and believable, and he brought to Maximus a depth of grief and honor and controlled fury that made the character one of the most compelling heroes in the history of blockbuster cinema. When Gladiator was released in 2000, it was an enormous global success, and Russell Crowe stood at the absolute center of it. The following year, at the 73rd Academy Awards, he won the Oscar for Best Actor. He stood on that stage and accepted it with the same directness and absence of pretense that defines everything he does. The years following Gladiator brought more extraordinary work. A Beautiful Mind in 2001, directed by Ron Howard, gave him one of the most challenging roles of his career, playing the brilliant and mentally ill mathematician John Nash through decades of his life, from young genius to paranoid breakdown to hard-won recovery. The performance earned him another Academy Award nomination and is considered by many critics to be the finest work of his career. Master and Commander in 2003 showed yet another dimension of what he could do, playing a Royal Navy captain in a film of immense historical detail and quiet power. Cinderella Man in 2005, again directed by Ron Howard, cast him as Depression-era boxer James Braddock in a film of great warmth and emotional honesty. Throughout all of this, Russell Crowe remained committed to his music, touring and recording with his band and making clear that this was not a vanity project but a genuine creative need. He also maintained his connection to New Zealand and Australia, purchasing a cattle farm in New South Wales that became his real home and the place where he grounded himself away from the pressures and unreality of Hollywood. He married Australian actress and singer Danielle Spencer in 2003, and they had 2 sons together, Charles and Tennyson. The marriage eventually ended in separation in 2012, though both have spoken about their relationship with respect and genuine affection. Russell Crowe is now in his 60s, and he continues to work with the same relentless energy and commitment that has characterized his entire career. He returned to the world of Gladiator in 2024 in a completely different capacity, appearing in Gladiator 2 in a supporting role as a nod to the film that defined him. He is a complicated, difficult, brilliant, passionate, and utterly uncompromising man, and those qualities are present in every single performance he has ever given. There are very few actors in the history of Hollywood cinema who have shown the range, the depth, and the consistent quality that Russell Crowe has demonstrated across his career. Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Raphael Phoenix was born on the 28th of October 1974 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, the 4th of 5 children in one of the most extraordinary and unconventional families in Hollywood history. His parents, John Lee Bottom and Arlene Sharon, were deeply spiritual people who at various points in Joaquin's early childhood were members of a religious organization called Children of God, a group that shaped the family's nomadic and deeply communal early years. The family traveled extensively, living in Central and South America and Puerto Rico before eventually settling in the United States. They were poor, genuinely poor in ways that left a mark on all of the children, but they were also creative, imaginative, and fiercely devoted to one another. The family changed their surname to Phoenix, a deliberate symbolic choice representing the idea of rising from the ashes and beginning again, which, given everything they had been through and everything that was still to come, turned out to be a name that carried more weight than anyone could have anticipated. All 5 of the Phoenix children became performers to varying degrees. Rain, River, Joaquin, Liberty, and Summer each found their way into the entertainment industry, though none more dramatically and none with more devastating consequence than River. River Phoenix was the eldest and the first to achieve major fame, becoming one of the most celebrated and promising young actors of the 1980s with performances in Stand By Me and Running on Empty that were genuinely remarkable in their depth and sensitivity. He was, by any measure, a once-in-a-generation talent, and the entire family revolved around him to a significant degree during Joaquin's formative years. Joaquin idolized his older brother. He watched River work, absorbed everything, and began his own career in television and film as a child, initially credited under the name Lee Phoenix, a name he used for several years before eventually returning to Joaquin. His early career included appearances in television films and a notable role in the 1986 film Space Camp. But the trajectory of his life and career was shattered on the night of October 30, 1993, when River Phoenix collapsed outside a nightclub on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles and died of a drug overdose at the age of 23. It was one of the most shocking and heartbreaking losses in the history of Hollywood, and for Joaquin, who was present that night and who made the desperate phone call to emergency services while his brother was dying, it was a trauma of almost incomprehensible depth. He was 19 years old, and the person he admired most in the world was gone in a single terrible night. What followed was a period of grief and withdrawal. Joaquin essentially disappeared from the public eye for a period, processing a loss that would have broken many people entirely. But eventually he came back, and when he came back with something new. A rawness, an urgency, a quality of barely contained emotion that would define his performances for the rest of his career. He returned to acting with a hunger and a ferocity that seemed to be connected to his loss in ways that were not entirely articulable but were absolutely visible on screen. His performance in To Die For in 1995 alongside Nicole Kidman announced his return and showed immediately that he was not simply trading on his family name or his brother's legacy. He was building something of his own, inventing a screen presence that was genuinely unique. He had a quality that very few actors possess, the ability to make you feel that you are watching a real person rather than a performance, that the thoughts and feelings moving across his face are actually being generated in real time rather than recalled from rehearsal. He was terrifying in the best possible way because he was unpredictable. You never quite knew what he was going to do next. Gladiator came at a period when Joaquin Phoenix was respected within the industry but had not yet broken through to the very highest level of popular recognition. Ridley Scott cast him as Commodus, and the role fit him like a second skin. He brought to Commodus something extraordinary, a portrayal not of simple evil but of a damaged, desperate, terrified child wearing the armor of a tyrant. Every scene Joaquin Phoenix has in Gladiator is a study in the mechanics of psychological complexity. He makes you understand Commodus even as you despise him, which is infinitely more disturbing and more interesting than simply making you hate him. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor and introduced him to a global audience in the most powerful way possible. The years that followed Gladiator saw Joaquin Phoenix build one of the most extraordinary and unconventional filmographies in modern cinema. He played Johnny Cash in Walk the Line in 2005, a performance of staggering commitment that required him to learn to sing and play guitar convincingly enough to record his own music, and which earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. He was magnificent in the role, capturing not just the surface of Cash's famous persona but the darkness and the hunger and the spiritual searching that lay beneath it. Then came one of the strangest and most discussed episodes in Hollywood history. In 2008, Joaquin Phoenix announced that he was retiring from acting to pursue a career as a rapper. He appeared at public events looking disheveled and disoriented, gave a bizarre and incoherent interview on the David Letterman show that became immediately legendary, and seemed to be having some kind of profound public breakdown. The entertainment press was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. It turned out that the entire episode was an elaborate performance art project, a documentary called I'm Still Here, directed by his brother-in-law Casey Affleck, which was intended as an examination of celebrity and media. The line between genuine breakdown and performance was deliberately blurred, and to this day opinions differ about exactly how much of what was shown was real and how much was constructed. He returned to acting as though nothing had happened, and immediately delivered one of the finest performances of his career in The Master in 2012, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, playing a deeply troubled World War II veteran who becomes entangled with a charismatic cult leader. Then came Her in 2013, in which he played a lonely man who falls in love with an artificial intelligence operating system, a film of extraordinary gentleness and melancholy that showed yet another dimension of what he was capable of. Inherent Vice in 2014 was a deliberately chaotic and funny performance in a deliberately chaotic and funny film. And then came Joker in 2019. Joker was one of the most discussed and debated films of the decade. Joaquin Phoenix played Arthur Fleck, a failed comedian and deeply mentally ill man whose descent into violence and chaos becomes the origin story of the most famous villain in comic book history. The performance was unlike anything anyone had seen before. It was physical in the most extreme way, Phoenix having lost an enormous amount of weight for the role, and it was psychological in a depth that felt genuinely disturbing. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Joker, finally receiving the ultimate recognition for a body of work that had been building toward that moment for decades. In his acceptance speech, he spoke with the raw honesty and moral seriousness that characterizes everything about him, talking about the interconnection of all living things and the ways in which human beings cause suffering through their sense of entitlement. Joaquin Phoenix is now one of the most respected and admired actors in the world, a man who has spent his entire career refusing to play it safe, refusing to take the comfortable choice, refusing to repeat himself. He is fiercely private about his personal life, has been in a long and devoted relationship with actress Rooney Mara, with whom he has a son named River, named in honor of his late brother. He is a committed vegan and animal rights activist. He is complicated and brilliant, and impossible to categorize, which is exactly what makes him so endlessly compelling to watch. Connie Nielsen. Connie Nielsen was born on the 3rd of July 1965, in Frederikshavn, a coastal city in the northern part of Denmark. She grew up in a country with a strong cultural tradition of theater and film, in a society that valued artistic expression and took storytelling seriously. From an early age, she was drawn to performance and languages, developing a facility for foreign tongues that would later prove invaluable in building an international career. She is fluent in multiple languages including Danish, English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish, a linguistic ability that reflects both her natural intelligence and the extraordinary range of her life experience. She left Denmark as a young woman and spent time in France and Italy, immersing herself in European culture and building her early career in European film and theater. She studied acting seriously, developing a technical foundation that would support the emotional truthfulness she brought to her work. Her European career gave her a sophistication and a depth that set her apart from many of her contemporaries, and when she eventually made the transition to Hollywood, she brought those qualities with her intact. Her American breakthrough came with the 1997 film The Devil's Advocate, in which she appeared alongside Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves. It was a significant role in a high-profile film, and she handled it with the poise and intelligence that would become her trademark. But it was Gladiator that truly established her in the consciousness of global audiences. As Lucilla, the daughter of Marcus Aurelius and the sister of Commodus, she played a woman navigating one of the most dangerous and morally complex situations imaginable, caught between love, loyalty, family obligation, and her own conscience. It was a role that required enormous subtlety because Lucilla cannot say what she truly thinks, cannot act on what she truly believes, cannot be honest about what she truly knows without risking the life of her son and her own. Every scene Connie Nielsen has in Gladiator is about what is not being said, about the enormous pressure of holding truth inside while performing compliance on the surface, and she plays it with a precision and a grace that is extraordinary. Following Gladiator, she continued to build a career in both American and European film and television. She appeared in films ranging from 101 Dalmatians to Mission to Mars to Brothers, always bringing the same quality of intelligence and emotional honesty to whatever she was doing. She returned to the world of Gladiator in Gladiator 2 in 2024, reprising her role as Lucilla and proving that the character still had depths worth exploring. In her personal life, Connie Nielsen has been deeply committed to humanitarian causes, particularly in relation to conflict zones and displaced populations. She has worked with various international organizations and brought genuine attention and resources to causes that matter to her. She has a son from a relationship with Danish musician Lars Ulrich, the drummer of Metallica, and has maintained a life that balances the demands of her career with a genuine engagement with the world beyond the film industry. Richard Harris. Richard Harris was born on the 1st of October 1930, in Limerick, Ireland, a city that shaped him profoundly and to which he always felt a deep and complicated attachment. He grew up in a large Irish Catholic family during a period of considerable economic difficulty, and the Ireland of his childhood was a place of enormous cultural richness existing alongside real material hardship. He was a passionate rugby player as a young man, good enough to consider pursuing the sport professionally, and that physical energy and competitive drive never left him even as his life moved in completely different directions. He came to acting through the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, where he trained in the 1950s and developed the theatrical foundation that would underpin everything he did on stage and screen for the next half-century. He was part of a generation of Irish and British actors who brought a new kind of energy and rawness to their work, men like Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton, brilliant, larger than life, capable of great heights and spectacular self-destruction, and Richard Harris fitted perfectly into that company. He was magnificent, excessive, passionate, and absolutely impossible to ignore. His film career began in earnest in the early 1960s, and his breakthrough came with This Sporting Life in 1963, in which he played a brutish and emotionally inarticulate rugby league player whose relationships are destroyed by his inability to connect with other human beings. It was a performance of extraordinary physical and psychological power that earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor and established him as one of the most exciting actors in the world. He was ferocious in the role, giving everything he had and perhaps a little more, and the film remains one of the great British kitchen sink dramas of that era. The decades that followed were a mixture of enormous achievement and genuine chaos. He starred in major films including Camelot in 1967, in which he played King Arthur, and which he also recorded as a musical album, scoring an unexpected hit with the song MacArthur Park that reached the top of the charts in multiple countries and became one of the most famous and endlessly discussed pop songs of its era. He made A Man Called Horace in 1970 and its sequels, films that were significant in their attempt to portray Native American culture with greater authenticity than Hollywood had previously attempted. He was a man of enormous appetites for life, for drink, for companionship, for argument, for experience of every kind, and his personal life was as dramatic and turbulent as anything in his films. He married actress Elizabeth Rees in 1957, and they had 3 sons together before eventually divorcing. His relationship with alcohol was legendary and at times genuinely destructive, contributing to periods of his career where his enormous talent was not being used to anything like its full potential. But he was also capable of deep sobriety and extraordinary productivity, and he never lost the fundamental quality that made him compelling, a raw emotional honesty, an absolute refusal to be false, a presence that filled whatever space he occupied. In his later years, Richard Harris experienced something of a renaissance. He returned to the stage with great success, performed in major films, and then accepted 2 roles that introduced him to an entirely new generation of audiences. The first was in Gladiator in 2000, where he played Emperor Marcus Aurelius with a quiet authority and profound moral gravity that was perfectly suited to a man who was himself old and wise and had seen everything. He is on screen for a relatively brief period in the film, but his presence anchors the entire first act, and the weight of his performance gives the story its moral foundation. The second was the role of Albus Dumbledore in the first 2 Harry Potter films in 2001 and 2002, which introduced him to children and families around the world and cemented his status as one of the great beloved figures of cinema. Richard Harris died on the 25th of October, 2002, just a few days before his 72nd birthday, from Hodgkin's lymphoma. He died in London, surrounded by people who loved him, a man who had lived more fully and more extravagantly than almost anyone, who had made work of genuine greatness, who had struggled and failed and recovered and struggled again, and who left behind a body of work that will continue to reward viewers for generations. He was one of the truly irreplaceable figures in the history of British and Irish cinema. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed was born on the 13th of February 1938, in Wimbledon, London, England, into a family that had strong connections to the arts. His uncle was the famous British film director Carol Reed, the man behind The Third Man, one of the most celebrated British films ever made. Growing up in that environment, with an uncle who was one of the most respected filmmakers of his generation, Oliver was surrounded by creativity and ambition from the very beginning, though his own path to that world was neither smooth nor straightforward. He was a difficult child and a more difficult teenager, restless and aggressive and resistant to conventional education and conventional authority. He spent time in the British Army, which gave him some structure and discipline but did not fundamentally change the combustible nature that would define his entire life. He worked various jobs before finding his way into acting in the late 1950s, starting with small film roles and gradually building a presence in the British film industry through sheer force of personality. His breakthrough came in the early 1960s when he began working with director Michael Winner and developed a screen persona that was powerful, masculine, and slightly dangerous in a way that audiences found irresistible. He appeared in a series of Hammer horror films that gave him early visibility, and then his career began to accelerate dramatically. He played Bill Sikes in the 1968 musical Oliver, a classic adaptation of the Charles Dickens novel Oliver Twist directed by Carol Reed, his uncle, in a performance that was physically imposing and genuinely frightening. The film won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and Oliver Reed's performance was one of its most talked about elements. He worked with director Ken Russell on several films that became landmarks of British cinema, including Women in Love in 1969, in which he delivered a performance of raw physical and emotional power, and The Devils in 1971, one of the most controversial and visually extraordinary British films ever made, in which he played a French Catholic priest in a story of religious hysteria and political persecution. Ken Russell and Oliver Reed brought out the best in each other in a creative partnership that produced work of remarkable intensity and ambition. But Oliver Reed's personal life was becoming increasingly legendary for all the wrong reasons. He was a drinker of almost mythological proportions, capable of consuming quantities of alcohol that would have hospitalized a lesser man, and he seemed to take a perverse pride in his capacity for excess. He was frequently involved in brawls, behaved outrageously at public events, gave interviews that were by turns hilarious and deeply alarming, and developed a reputation as one of the most difficult and unpredictable figures in the British entertainment industry. Some of this was genuine self-destruction. Some of it was performance, a deliberate cultivation of the rebel outsider image. The line between the two was not always clear even to those who knew him well. Despite this, he continued to make genuinely excellent films throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s. Tommy, Three Musketeers, Burnt Offerings, and many others showed that the talent was always there, even when the behavior surrounding it was causing chaos. He moved to Ireland for a period and later to the Channel Island of Guernsey, living quietly and farming, finding a peace in rural life that the city had never given him. When Ridley Scott cast him as Proximo in Gladiator, it was seen by many as a genuine comeback opportunity for a man whose career had been overshadowed for too long by the legend of his personal excess. He threw himself into the role with enormous commitment, bringing to Proximo a complexity and a humanity that elevated what could have been a fairly straightforward supporting character into something genuinely memorable. Proximo is funny and rough and mercenary and, at the very end, when it counts most, something approaching noble. Oliver Reed understood this character deeply and played every dimension of him with the instinctive skill of a man who had been doing this for 4 decades. He never finished the film. On the 2nd of May 1999, while the production was based in Malta, Oliver Reed died of a heart attack in a bar in Valletta after reportedly drinking an extraordinary quantity of rum and arm wrestling members of the Royal Navy. He was 61 years old. The production was faced with the genuinely difficult task of completing his character's story without him, and they used a combination of unused footage and digital technology to finish the scenes that remained, creating one of the earliest significant uses of digital human reconstruction in a major Hollywood film. It is a tribute to the quality of the work he had already done that his performance in the final film is seamless and deeply moving. Oliver Reed died the way he lived, with excess and without apology, and the tragedy is real because Gladiator was the film that was going to remind everyone what he was truly capable of. He never got to see it. He never got to take his place at the premiere or accept the praise that would undoubtedly have come his way. But the performance is there, on screen, permanent and undeniable, and it is one of the finest things he ever did. Djimon Hounsou. Djimon Hounsou was born on the 24th of April 1964, in Cotonou, Benin, a small country on the west coast of Africa. His early life was marked by hardship of the most fundamental kind. He grew up in poverty, the son of working-class parents in a country with limited economic opportunity, and at the age of 13 he moved with his older brother to France, specifically to Lyon, in search of a better life. The reality of that better life was considerably harder than anything they had imagined. The 2 young boys from Benin found themselves in a foreign country with a foreign language, with no money and no connections, navigating a world that had no particular interest in making things easy for them. Djimon eventually made his way to Paris, where his situation deteriorated to the point where he was living on the streets, homeless in one of the most beautiful cities in the world, surviving as best he could. It was during this desperate period that something unexpected happened. A fashion photographer noticed him on the street and was struck by his extraordinary physical presence, his bone structure, the quality of stillness and intensity that he carried even in the most difficult circumstances. He was offered modeling work, and he took it. That modeling career became his lifeline. He worked with major fashion houses and photographers and built a reputation in the European fashion world before eventually transitioning to the United States, where his modeling career continued to flourish. He appeared in music videos, most famously in Janet Jackson's Love Will Never Do Without You, which gave him enormous visibility and led directly to him being noticed by Hollywood. His acting breakthrough came with Steven Spielberg's Amistad in 1997, in which he played Sengbi P., also known as Joseph Sink, the leader of a slave revolt aboard the Spanish slave ship La Amistad in 1839. It was an extraordinary debut, a role of immense historical and emotional weight, and Djimon Hounsou performed it with a physical power and a raw emotional authenticity that was absolutely devastating. He had almost no formal acting training. What he had instead was a life experience that gave him a genuine understanding of what it means to be stripped of your identity, your language, your freedom, your sense of self, and to fight to hold on to your humanity in the face of all of it. He knew this story from the inside in ways that most actors could only approximate from the outside. Gladiator gave him the role of Juba, And while Juba is not the central character of the film, he is its emotional heart in many ways. The bond between Juba and Maximus is one of the most quietly powerful relationships in the film, built not on dramatic declarations but on small moments of genuine human connection between two men who have both lost everything and who find in each other a reason to keep going. Jimin Hunsu brought to Juba a warmth and a dignity and a stillness that grounded the film and gave it much of its emotional depth. Following Gladiator, he continued to build an extraordinary career, earning Academy Award nominations for Best Supporting Actor for his performances in America in 2003 and Blood Diamond in 2006, becoming one of a very small number of actors to receive two such nominations without ever winning, which remains one of the more curious and debated oversights in Oscar history. He has worked consistently across a wide range of films and genres, bringing the same quality of presence and authenticity to everything he does. His personal life has not always been easy. He was in a long relationship with model and television personality Kimora Lee Simmons, with whom he has a daughter, Kenzo. He has spoken openly about the financial difficulties he has faced at various points in his career, including the period when, despite being one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, he was struggling economically, a reflection of the persistent inequities that continue to affect even successful actors of color working in the American film industry. He has spoken about these issues with honesty and without bitterness, maintaining the same dignity in his personal life that he brings to his work. Jimin Hunsu is now in his 60s and remains one of the most compelling and respected performers working in film and television, a man whose journey from the streets of Paris to the highest levels of global cinema is itself a story of almost cinematic improbability and power. The budget and the money behind the spectacle. When Ridley Scott sat down with the studios and began talking about what he wanted to do with Gladiator, the people holding the purse strings at DreamWorks and Universal Pictures quickly realized that this was not going to be a cheap conversation. Scott had a vision that was enormous in every sense of the word, and enormous visions require enormous amounts of money. The final production budget for Gladiator came in at $103 million, which in the year 2000 was a genuinely staggering sum to commit to a historical epic in a genre that Hollywood had largely abandoned decades earlier. The studios were taking a significant risk, and everyone involved knew it. What made the budget conversation even more complicated was the fact that when production began, the script was not finished. This is one of the most extraordinary and almost insane facts about the making of Gladiator. Ridley Scott began shooting a film with a budget of over $100 million without a completed screenplay. Pages were being written, rewritten, debated, thrown out, and rewritten again, while cameras were already rolling and actors were already standing on set waiting to be told what they were doing. The writers, David Franzoni, John Logan, and William Nicholson, were essentially running alongside a moving train, trying to catch up with the production that had already started without them being fully ready. The decision to begin production without a finished script added enormous costs to the budget because changes in the screenplay meant changes in set construction, costume design, location requirements, and scheduling. Every time a scene was rewritten, it potentially meant that something that had already been built, or designed or planned needed to be altered or replaced entirely. The art department and the production design team, working under the brilliant production designer Arthur Max, were essentially building the world of ancient Rome in real time while the story of what was going to happen in that world was still being decided. It was a chaotic and extraordinarily expensive way to make a film, and it is a genuine miracle that the finished product is as coherent and powerful as it is. The largest single expense in the production was the recreation of the Colosseum. Ridley Scott wanted the Colosseum to feel real, not like a movie set but like an actual ancient structure that had been standing for 2,000 years and had witnessed everything imaginable. The production team constructed a section of the Colosseum to a height of approximately 52 feet on location in Malta, building the lower tiers of the arena in physical form so that the actors would have something genuinely real and imposing to perform against, and so that the crowd of extras would have an actual structure to sit in. The upper tiers, the ones that would make the Colosseum appear to be the full and overwhelming structure it actually was, were added later using computer-generated imagery and detailed miniatures. The combination of the physical set and the digital extension was so seamless that audiences watching the film had absolutely no way of telling where the real construction ended and the digital work began. The production filmed in multiple locations across Europe and North Africa. The opening battle sequence was filmed in the Bourne Woods in Surrey, England, a location that provided the dense, dark forest landscape that Scott needed for the Germanic campaign. The North African sequences, representing the gladiatorial training grounds and provincial arenas where Maximus begins his career as a fighter, were filmed in Morocco, specifically around the ancient city of Ouarzazate, which has been used as a filming location for numerous major productions over the decades. The Roman scenes were primarily filmed in Malta, particularly at the Fort Ricasoli complex, which provided a massive area of flat open space where the Colosseum set could be constructed without the kinds of geographical restrictions that would have made such a build impossible elsewhere. The costume budget alone was staggering. Costume designer Janty Yates was responsible for creating thousands of individual costumes that needed to look genuinely ancient without looking like costumes, that needed to move correctly during combat sequences, that needed to survive the brutal physical demands of fight scenes being performed by real stunt performers and actors in real heat on real dirt, and that needed to look convincing from every camera angle and every lighting condition. The research that went into the costumes was extraordinary, drawing on historical sources, archaeological evidence, and the advice of the historians that Ridley Scott had brought onto the production. The armor, in particular, required an enormous amount of work because it needed to be both historically plausible and practical for actors to actually wear and move in during the highly choreographed combat sequences. The gladiatorial combat itself required months of preparation and training. The fight choreography was developed over an extended period before filming began, with the actors and stunt performers working through detailed storyboards that planned every movement, every sword stroke, every shield block, and every camera angle. For the famous sequence in which Maximus fights Tigris of Gaul alongside live tigers, 5 actual tigers were brought onto set and positioned in the arena. This was not a decision made lightly. Working with live tigers on a film set is one of the most dangerous things you can do in any production environment, and the safety protocols required were extensive and expensive. Despite all of those protocols, one of the tigers clawed stuntman Sven O. Thorsen in the leg, another tore at his shoulder, and a third went for his helmet. Another performer was attacked twice and had to physically wrestle with one of the animals. The insurance costs alone for those sequences must have been extraordinary. The music budget was also significant. Hans Zimmer and Lisa Gerrard were brought together to create a score that would give the film its emotional foundation, and what they produced was one of the most extraordinary film scores ever recorded. Zimmer brought his full orchestra and his legendary approach to building musical themes that operate beneath your conscious awareness and hit you emotionally before your brain has had a chance to analyze what is happening. Lisa Gerrard brought her unique vocal style, a wordless, haunting sound that seemed to come from somewhere genuinely ancient, and gave the film's most emotional moments a quality of timelessness that no conventional orchestral score could have achieved alone. Recording and producing a score of that scale and ambition is not an inexpensive undertaking. The visual effects work was handled primarily by a British company called The Mill, and the most significant and most technically challenging aspect of their work was something that no one had planned for, and that added considerable unbudgeted cost to the production. When Oliver Reed died of a heart attack in Malta in May 1999, there were several scenes involving his character Proximo that had not yet been filmed. The production had unused footage of Reed from other scenes, and the decision was made to use that footage combined with digital technology to complete the character's story. This required the digital creation of a body double for Reed, mapping his likeness onto a performer, and integrating the result into scenes that were then filmed with other actors performing against an absent colleague. It was groundbreaking work for its time, and it was genuinely expensive, both in terms of the technical resources required and in terms of the time needed to make the result look convincing. The fact that you cannot tell, watching the finished film, which scenes involving Proxima were completed using this technology is a testament to the quality of the work. When the film was finally released on May 5, 2000, and began generating the kind of box office numbers that made studio executives breathe deeply and smile widely, the $103 million investment looked very different than it had when the production began. The film earned $187.7 million in the United States alone, making it the fourth highest-grossing film of 2000 domestically. Worldwide, it grossed $466 million, making it the second highest-grossing film of the entire year globally. The studios had taken a massive risk on an unfashionable genre with a director who wanted to do things his way and a star who was well respected but had not yet proven himself as a global box office draw, and the reward for that risk was extraordinary. The funny and chaotic moments behind the scenes. Now here is where things get genuinely entertaining, because for all the seriousness and the grandeur and the historical ambition of Gladiator, the making of it was filled with moments of comedy, absurdity, frustration, and the kind of chaotic human unpredictability that no amount of planning and no size of budget can ever fully eliminate. The most fundamental source of comedy on the set of Gladiator was the script situation, or more accurately, the lack of a script situation. Russell Crowe, who is not a man known for his patience or his willingness to simply accept whatever is put in front of him, was frequently arriving on set in the morning to discover that the scenes he was supposed to film that day had been rewritten overnight, or that pages had not arrived yet, or that the scene he had spent the previous evening preparing for had been cut entirely and replaced with something else. This did not make him happy. Russell Crowe unhappy on a film set is not a quiet or easily ignored phenomenon. He was vocal about his frustration, articulate about his opinions regarding what was working and what was not, and absolutely unwilling to pretend otherwise. There were reportedly significant creative tensions between Crowe and the writing team, with the actor pushing back against lines and scenes he felt were not working and demanding changes that the writers did not always feel were improvements. The most famous specific example of this creative friction involves one of the most iconic lines in the entire film. The speech that Maximus delivers in the Colosseum, the one in which he reveals his identity to Commodus, that devastating declaration of who he is and what he wants, was not something that Russell Crowe was satisfied with as it was written on the page. He reportedly felt that the scripted version of the speech was not right, that it did not capture the weight and the fury and the precision that the moment required. He worked extensively on revising it, and there were multiple takes and multiple versions filmed on the day. What ended up in the finished film is now considered one of the great speeches in cinema history. But getting there was apparently a process that involved considerable discussion, some of it heated, about exactly what the words should be and how they should be delivered. Joaquin Phoenix had his own approach to the material that was sometimes bewildering to the people around him and occasionally hilarious in its unpredictability. Phoenix is a deeply committed method actor who takes the internal life of his characters with extraordinary seriousness, and his preparation for Commodus involved immersing himself in the psychological reality of the character in ways that did not always make him easy to be around. He was known on set for staying deeply inside the character between takes, for being genuinely unsettling in the way that a person who is playing a genuinely unsettling character while never quite dropping the performance tends to be. The crew reportedly never quite knew which version of Joaquin they were going to get on any given day, the thoughtful and collaborative professional, or the man who seemed to be operating on a different psychological frequency from everyone else. Both versions showed up regularly. Oliver Reed, as might be expected given everything that has already been said about his relationship with alcohol and excess, was a source of constant entertainment, an occasional genuine alarm during his time on the production. Reed arrived in Malta for filming and immediately set about establishing himself as a force of nature that the local population of the island had not previously encountered and would not quickly forget. He was apparently enormously popular with the crew in the way that genuinely larger-than-life people who commit fully to every moment of their existence tend to be popular with people who spend their days surrounded by professionals who are trying to be careful and measured and appropriate. Reed was none of those things, and there was something liberating about watching someone operate with such magnificent disregard for the rules of normal social behavior. His performances on set were consistently excellent, and consistently professional in the sense that when the camera was rolling, he was fully present and fully committed to the work. But the moments between takes and the evenings after filming wrapped were apparently something else entirely. The stories that circulated among the cast and crew about Reed's behavior during the Malta production period are numerous and entertaining, involving drinking sessions of legendary duration, conversations with locals that apparently became the stuff of local legend, and an overall approach to the experience of being on location that suggested he was intending to experience every possible aspect of Maltese life before the production moved on. The sequences involving the tigers were a source of both genuine terror and considerable dark comedy among the crew. The decision to use live tigers in the arena sequence was Ridley Scott's, because Scott believed that if you wanted the audience to feel the danger and the chaos and the genuine animal unpredictability of what Maximus was facing, you needed to put real animals in the arena rather than relying entirely on computer-generated versions. This was a completely reasonable creative decision that was also absolutely terrifying to execute in practice. The tigers were handled by professional animal trainers, the safety protocols were extensive, and everyone on set had been thoroughly briefed about appropriate behavior around the animals. And then the cameras started rolling and the tigers proceeded to behave in the completely unpredictable way that tigers behave, which is to say that they did exactly what they wanted regardless of what the storyboard said they were supposed to do. The moment when one of the tigers turned and grabbed Sven O. Thorsen, the enormously muscular performer playing Tigress of Gaul, was not in the script. The moment when another tiger went for his shoulder was not in the script. None of the moments when the tigers decided to interact with the performers in ways that the performers had not agreed to were in the script. Looking back on these episodes from a safe distance, and with the knowledge that everyone survived, there is something genuinely comic about the image of an enormous production with hundreds of crew members, millions of dollars of equipment, one of the most respected directors in Hollywood at the helm, and 5 tigers who were simply not interested in cooperating with any of it. Russell Crowe's relationship with his own costume and armor was apparently a consistent source of frustration and occasional profanity throughout the production. The armor worn by Maximus was historically researched and carefully designed, but historically researched and carefully designed armor is not necessarily comfortable armor, particularly when you are wearing it in the heat of a Maltese summer while performing physically demanding combat sequences. Crowe was reportedly not shy about communicating his feelings regarding the comfort level of his costume, and the wardrobe department became very familiar with his particular requirements and preferences over the course of the production. The crowd sequences in the Colosseum required enormous numbers of extras, and managing thousands of extras in a confined space while trying to direct a film is one of the great logistical challenges of big-budget cinema. The extras were sourced from Malta and surrounding areas, and the challenge of getting thousands of people to respond in coordinated ways to events happening on the arena floor below them, to cheer at the right moments and fall silent at the right moments, and react with appropriate horror or delight to things they were being told to react to by someone with a megaphone rather than actually witnessing, produced moments of genuine comedy when the coordination broke down. There were apparently occasions when the entire crowd cheered enthusiastically at completely the wrong moment, or when half the crowd was cheering while the other half was sitting in confused silence, requiring the entire sequence to be reset and begun again. Ridley Scott himself, who was famously precise and demanding in his approach to filmmaking, was apparently a source of both inspiration and anxiety for the crew on a daily basis. He is a director who knows exactly what he wants, which is admirable, but the thing he wants has a tendency to change as he is actually looking at what he has got, which is less admirable from the perspective of people who have spent considerable time and effort giving him what they thought he wanted. The production was filled with moments where carefully planned and expensively executed work was examined, found wanting, and replaced with something different, a process that is responsible for much of the quality of the finished film, but that was apparently not always easy to live through. One of the more charming and unexpected sources of levity on the production was Derek Jacobi, who plays Senator Gracchus with great dignity and authority in the finished film, and who was apparently a genuinely warm and funny presence on set. A man with decades of theatrical experience who understood that maintaining a sense of humor in difficult conditions was one of the most important professional skills an actor could possess. He was reportedly well liked by everyone on the production and served as something of a calming influence during the more intense and chaotic moments of the shoot. The Malta filming period was particularly intense because the bulk of the Colosseum sequences were filmed there, which meant that the production was simultaneously managing the physical set, the crowd of extras, the complex fight choreography, the technical demands of the camera work, and the general unpredictability of filming in an outdoor location where the weather, the light, and approximately 1,000 other things were beyond anyone's control. There were days when the light was wrong and nothing could be filmed until it changed. There were days when equipment failed at critical moments. There were days when everything that could go wrong did go wrong in quick succession, and the entire crew had to stand around in the heat and find ways to remain productive while the problems were being solved. The physical training regimen that the principal actors underwent before and during filming was another source of considerable amusement for those observing it. Russell Crowe and the other performers playing gladiators were required to develop genuine physical capability for the combat sequences, and the training program was extensive, involving sword work, shield techniques, physical conditioning, and the kind of daily physical punishment that professional athletes undergo. The gap between what the actors looked like when they arrived for training and what they looked like after several months of serious preparation was reportedly dramatic, and the process of getting there involved a considerable amount of pain, exhaustion, and occasional undignified collapse that was not entirely consistent with the heroic image the finished film projects. The score recording sessions with Hans Zimmer were their own kind of extraordinary experience. Zimmer is known for the intensity and totality of his commitment to his work, and the sessions for Gladiator were conducted with the kind of focused energy that can feel overwhelming if you are not prepared for it. Lisa Gerrard's vocal contributions, recorded separately, required a very different kind of session, one centered on allowing her unique and deeply personal vocal style to find its way into the emotional spaces of the film without being over-directed or overproduced. The process of combining Zimmer's orchestral work with Gerrard's vocal contributions into the seamless whole that appears in the finished film was apparently a more complicated and iterative process than either of them had anticipated, though the result speaks for itself. When principal photography finally wrapped in May 1999, the production had been going for approximately 5 months of shooting across multiple countries and locations, had consumed $103 million, had involved live tigers, digital resurrection of a deceased cast member, a script that was being written in real time, and all of the various human dramas and comedies and arguments and breakthroughs that come with putting that many talented and passionate people together in demanding conditions and asking them to create something extraordinary. By any reasonable measure, the fact that Gladiator turned out to be the film it is, rather than the expensive and chaotic disaster it could easily have been, is itself one of the more remarkable stories in Hollywood history. The world that Gladiator was built upon. To truly understand Gladiator as a film, you cannot simply watch it as an action movie about a man seeking revenge. You have to understand the world it is drawing from, the civilization it is attempting to recreate, the historical figures it is borrowing from, and the cultural traditions it is reaching back into in order to build its story. Gladiator is rooted in one of the most fascinating and complex civilizations in human history, the Roman Empire at the height of its power, and the gap between what that civilization actually was and what the film presents is itself one of the most interesting conversations you can have about this movie. So let us go through all of it, layer by layer, and build a complete picture of the historical and cultural world that Gladiator inhabits. The Roman Empire in 180 AD. The film is set specifically in the year 180 AD, and this date is not chosen randomly. It sits at one of the most significant turning points in the entire history of the Roman Empire, a moment that historians have debated and analyzed for centuries because it marks the end of one of the greatest periods of stable and enlightened governance the ancient world ever produced, and the beginning of a long and complicated decline. To understand why this date matters, you have to understand what came before it. The period immediately preceding the events of Gladiator is known as the Era of the Five Good Emperors, a succession of rulers spanning from roughly 96 AD to 180 AD who governed the Roman Empire with a combination of military competence, administrative skill, philosophical wisdom, and genuine concern for the welfare of their subjects that was almost unprecedented in the ancient world. These five emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and finally Marcus Aurelius, presided over what the historian Edward Gibbon famously described as the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous. The Roman Empire during this era stretched from the Scottish borders in the north to the Sahara Desert in the south, from the Atlantic coast of Portugal in the west to the borders of Mesopotamia in the east. It was the largest and most powerful political entity in the Western world, and under the five good emperors it was governed with a degree of wisdom and restraint that made it genuinely remarkable by the standards of any era. Marcus Aurelius, the last of the five good emperors and the man played by Richard Harris in Gladiator, was perhaps the most extraordinary of the five. He was a philosopher king in the most literal sense of the term, a man who spent the last decade of his life fighting wars on the frontiers of the empire, while simultaneously writing one of the greatest works of philosophical literature in human history. His personal journals, written in Greek and known today as the Meditations, are a record of his private thoughts, his struggles with his own weaknesses and failures, his attempts to live according to the principles of Stoic philosophy, and his reflections on the nature of duty, mortality, power, and what it means to be a good human being. These writings were never intended for publication. They were written for himself, as a kind of ongoing private conversation with his own conscience, and the fact that they survived and that they speak with such clarity and emotional immediacy to readers 2,000 years later is one of the more remarkable facts in the history of literature. The real Marcus Aurelius died on the 17th of March 180 AD, almost certainly from the Antonine Plague, a devastating pandemic that had been sweeping through the empire for years and that had already killed millions of people. He died on campaign, near the frontier city of Vindobona, which is now the city of Vienna in Austria. The film's portrayal of him as a dying old man in a military camp during the Germanic campaign is therefore historically grounded, though the specific circumstances of his death, and the nature of his relationship with his son, and with any general named Maximus are dramatic inventions. The real Commodus. Commodus, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is the film's villain, and the real historical Commodus was indeed one of the most genuinely extraordinary and disturbing figures in Roman history, though the reality of him is in some ways even stranger and more fascinating than the film's version. Lucius Aurelius Commodus was born in 161 AD and became co-emperor with his father Marcus Aurelius in 177 AD, making him in effect the joint ruler of Rome for the last 3 years of his father's life. He was not, therefore, someone who seized power by killing his father in the way the film depicts. He was the legitimate and recognized heir who had already been granted imperial authority before his father died. The historical Commodus was obsessed with the gladiatorial games in a way that went far beyond anything the film depicts. He did not merely watch the games from his imperial box. He actually participated in them, entering the arena himself and fighting as a gladiator. He was not fighting to the death against skilled professional fighters, The contests were carefully controlled to ensure his safety, and his opponents were handicapped in various ways to guarantee that the emperor would always prevail. But the fact that a Roman emperor would enter the arena at all, would dress himself as a gladiator, would demean the imperial office in that way, was considered profoundly shocking and deeply disgraceful by the Roman aristocracy and Senate. He reportedly killed numerous animals in the arena, including lions, ostriches, and hippos, and he fought hundreds of staged gladiatorial bouts, declaring himself the champion of Rome and demanding that he be worshipped as the reincarnation of Hercules. He renamed Rome after himself, calling it Colonia Lucia Aeneia Commodiana, which translates roughly as the colony of Commodus. He renamed the months of the year after himself and his various titles. He renamed the Roman legions after himself. He had statues of himself erected depicting him as Hercules, complete with lion skin and club. He executed senators and members of the aristocracy seemingly at whim, often for perceived slights or imagined conspiracies. He was by any reasonable historical assessment deeply paranoid, probably mentally ill, and genuinely dangerous to everyone around him. He was not killed in the arena in single combat with a gladiator, as the film depicts. He was assassinated on the 31st of December 192 AD, after ruling for approximately 12 years rather than the much shorter period implied by the film. The assassination was organized by a conspiracy that included his mistress Marcia, his chamberlain Eclectus, and the Praetorian prefect Quintus Aemilius Laetus. The actual killing was carried out by a wrestler named Narcissus, who strangled Commodus in his bath. It was an unglamorous end for a man who had spent years presenting himself as a divine hero, and there is a certain historical justice in the contrast between the heroic death in the arena that the film gives him and the reality of being strangled in a bathtub by a hired wrestler. The institution of gladiatorial combat. The gladiatorial games that form the central backdrop of Gladiator are one of the most fascinating and misunderstood institutions of the ancient world, and the film does a reasonable job of conveying both their spectacle and their brutality while also perpetuating some of the myths and misconceptions that have always surrounded them. Understanding the reality of gladiatorial combat requires setting aside almost everything popular culture has told you about it and starting from scratch. Gladiatorial combat in ancient Rome did not begin as entertainment. Its origins are funerary in nature, rooted in the practice of staging ritual combat at the graves of important men as a tribute to their memory and as a way of honoring them with the spilling of blood. The earliest recorded gladiatorial contests in Rome date from 264 BC, when the sons of a recently deceased nobleman staged a combat between three pairs of fighters at their father's funeral. Over the following centuries, this funerary tradition gradually separated from its origins and became a public spectacle in its own right, eventually evolving into the massive, institutionalized entertainment industry that the film depicts. The gladiators themselves were a much more complex social phenomenon than popular culture generally acknowledges. The vast majority of gladiators were indeed slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, people who entered the arena without having chosen to do so. But there was also a significant number of free men who voluntarily signed contracts with gladiatorial schools, trading their legal freedom for guaranteed food, shelter, medical care, and the possibility of fame and financial reward. These voluntary gladiators were a genuine and important part of the institution, and their existence tells you something important about the economic and social realities of ancient Rome. For a poor free man with no prospects, signing on as a gladiator could represent a genuine improvement in living conditions, at least in the short term. The training that gladiators received was extensive, expensive, and highly specialized. The gladiatorial schools, known as ludi, were sophisticated institutions with professional trainers, medical staff, nutritional programs, and carefully designed training regimens. Gladiators were valuable investments, and the owners of gladiatorial schools had strong financial incentives to keep them alive and in good physical condition. The popular image of gladiators fighting to the death in every contest is significantly exaggerated. While gladiatorial combat was genuinely dangerous and deaths did occur with some regularity, the economic reality was that killing a trained gladiator represented a significant financial loss. Most contests ended not with death but with one fighter being incapacitated or surrendering, at which point the crowd and the presiding official would decide the loser's fate. The famous thumbs up and thumbs down gesture that has become iconic in popular depictions of gladiatorial judgment is almost certainly a myth, or at least a significant distortion of what actually happened. The historical evidence for exactly what gesture was used to indicate whether a defeated gladiator should live or die is ambiguous and contested among scholars. What is clear is that the crowd and the presiding magistrate or emperor did have the power to determine the fate of a defeated fighter, and that this power was an important part of the spectacle and the social function of the games. The Colosseum itself, known in antiquity as the Flavian Amphitheater, was begun by Emperor Vespasian around 70 AD and completed by his son Titus in 80 AD. It was the largest amphitheater ever built in the Roman world, capable of holding between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators depending on the configuration. The structure was a marvel of Roman engineering, featuring an elaborate system of underground tunnels and chambers beneath the arena floor where gladiators, animals, and equipment were held before being brought to the surface through trapdoors and mechanical lifts. The arena floor itself was covered with sand, which served the practical purpose of absorbing blood and making the surface less slippery for the fighters. The games held in the Colosseum were not simple gladiatorial contests. They were elaborate, full-day entertainments that typically began in the morning with animal hunts known as venations, in which professional hunters called bestiarii fought and killed exotic animals brought from across the empire. Lions, tigers, bears, elephants, rhinoceroses, hippos, giraffes, and countless other animals were brought to Rome at enormous expense and killed for the entertainment of the crowd. Estimates suggest that in the centuries of the Colosseum's active use, hundreds of thousands of animals were killed in its arena. The midday period was often used for public executions of criminals, sometimes carried out in elaborate theatrical ways that recreated mythological scenes or historical battles. The afternoon was given over to the gladiatorial contests proper, which were the main event and the thing the crowd had primarily come to see. The social function of these games was as important as their entertainment value. Roman emperors used the games as a political tool, a way of demonstrating their generosity to the Roman people and of maintaining the loyalty and goodwill of the urban population. The phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses, coined by the satirist Juvenal, captures this dynamic precisely. An emperor who kept the people fed and entertained was an emperor who remained popular and secure. An emperor who neglected these obligations risked popular unrest and political instability. Commodus's massive season of games in the film is therefore a historically accurate reflection of how Roman emperors actually used public spectacle as a political instrument. Stoicism and the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. One of the most culturally significant aspects of Gladiator is the way it engages with Stoic philosophy, the ancient Greek philosophical tradition that Marcus Aurelius practiced and that deeply informs the moral universe of the film. Stoicism is a philosophy built around a small number of core principles that are both simple to state and extraordinarily difficult to live by. The Stoics believe that the only true good is virtue, that the only true evil is vice, and that everything else, wealth, health, fame, physical comfort, and even life itself, is what they called an indifferent, something that may be preferable or undesirable but that is not ultimately good or evil in itself. The practical implication of this philosophy is a radical reorientation of how you think about what is and is not in your control. The Stoics taught that you cannot control external events, you can only control your own responses to them. You cannot control whether you become sick, whether you lose your wealth, whether people treat you fairly, whether the people you love live or die. But you can control how you respond to all of these things. You can choose to respond with virtue, with courage, with wisdom, with justice, with equanimity. And if you make that choice consistently, regardless of what happens to you externally, you have lived a good life in the only sense that actually matters. This philosophy is absolutely central to the character of Maximus, as the film presents him. The things that happen to Maximus are objectively devastating. He loses his position, his freedom, his family, and ultimately his life. But through all of it, he maintains a quality of inner dignity and moral consistency that is recognizably stoic in its nature. He does not collapse into bitterness or nihilism. He does not abandon his values because circumstances have become impossible. He continues to act with honor and justice even in conditions of slavery and violence, and he dies having remained true to who he is throughout everything that was done to him. This is a stoic life, imperfectly rendered in the terms of a Hollywood action film, but genuinely rooted in the philosophical tradition that Marcus Aurelius himself embodied. The film's treatment of the Roman Senate and the idea of the Republic is also philosophically interesting. Marcus Aurelius's desire to return power to the Senate and restore the republican form of government is presented in the film as a noble and idealistic goal, and it reflects the genuine historical tension that existed throughout the imperial period of Roman history. The Roman Senate never entirely accepted its reduction to a ceremonial body under the emperors, and there were always those within it who remembered and idealized the republic that had preceded the empire. The idea of the republic, of government by law and by representative institutions rather than by the will of a single absolute ruler, was a powerful one in Roman political culture, and its presence in the film gives the story a political dimension that goes beyond simple personal revenge. Rome and its cultural legacy. The cultural significance of ancient Rome in the history of Western civilization is almost impossible to overstate. Rome was not merely an empire. It was the civilization that created the legal, linguistic, architectural, governmental, and cultural foundations upon which virtually all of Western European civilization was subsequently built. The Roman legal system, with its concepts of citizenship, due process, contracts, and the rights of individuals before the law, is the direct ancestor of virtually every legal system in the Western world today. The Latin language spoken in Rome became the parent language of Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, and it contributed thousands of words to English through both direct borrowing and through the Norman French influence that entered English after 1066. Roman architecture, with its arches, domes, columns, and monumental public spaces, has been imitated and adapted by architects across 15 centuries of Western building. The Roman calendar, reformed by Julius Caesar into what became known as the Julian calendar and subsequently adjusted into the Gregorian calendar used worldwide today, gave us the structure of the year we still live by. The months of our year are named after Roman gods, Roman emperors, and Latin numbers. Our system of numbering the hours of the day derives from Roman practice. The 7-day week, with its days named after Roman gods and the celestial bodies they governed, comes directly from the Roman world. The very concept of the city as the center of civilization, of urban life as the highest form of human organization, was a Roman idea that shaped the development of human society across the entire Western world and far beyond it. The Roman Empire's reach was genuinely extraordinary. At its greatest extent, under the Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire covered approximately 5 million square kilometers of territory and contained somewhere between 50 and 90 million people, representing somewhere between a quarter and a third of the entire human population of the Earth at that time. Within this enormous territory, Roman civilization created a degree of connectivity and cultural uniformity that the world would not see again until the modern era. A merchant traveling from Britannia in the northwest to Syria in the southeast would find the same laws, the same currency, the same administrative structures, the same architectural forms, and roughly the same cultural references and expectations throughout the journey. This level of integration across such a vast territory was one of the most remarkable achievements in human history. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, approximately 3 centuries after the events depicted in Gladiator, was one of the defining events in the history of human civilization. The causes of Rome's decline and fall have been debated by historians for centuries, with explanations ranging from military overextension to economic problems to the pressure of external invasions to internal political instability to the cultural and social changes brought about by the spread of Christianity. Edward Gibbon's enormous and magnificent History of the Decline and Fall, written in the 18th century, remains one of the masterworks of historical literature even though many of its specific arguments have been revised or challenged by subsequent scholarship. The question of why Rome fell continues to generate new research and new perspectives, and it continues to resonate because the story of a great civilization in decline carries obvious implications for any civilization that comes after it. Gladiator and the revival of the historical epic. Before Gladiator was released in 2000, the historical epic as a film genre had been essentially dormant in Hollywood for approximately 30 years. The golden age of the Hollywood epic had been the 1950s and 1960s, when films like Ben-Hur, Spartacus, Cleopatra, El Cid, and the fall of the Roman Empire had demonstrated that stories set in the ancient world could draw enormous audiences and generate spectacular box office returns. These films were themselves rooted in a long tradition of popular fascination with the ancient world that stretched back through 19th-century historical novels and paintings to the Renaissance rediscovery of classical antiquity. The genre had declined in the 1970s for a variety of reasons, including changing audience tastes, the enormous expense and logistical difficulty of producing films of that scale, and a general shift in Hollywood toward more contemporary and more psychologically realistic storytelling. By the time Ridley Scott began developing Gladiator, making a massive historical epic set in ancient Rome was considered a commercially dubious proposition by most people in the industry. The conventional wisdom was that audiences no longer had the patience or the interest for that kind of filmmaking, that the world of toga and sandal pictures belonged irretrievably to another era. Gladiator proved that conventional wisdom completely wrong. Its enormous commercial success demonstrated that the appetite for grand historical storytelling on a cinematic scale had never disappeared, it had simply been waiting for the right film to revive it. The success of Gladiator directly inspired a wave of similar productions in the years that followed, including Troy, Alexander, Kingdom of Heaven, and the television series Rome, all of which attempted to recapture some portion of what Gladiator had achieved. None of them matched it commercially or critically, which tells you something important about the specific combination of elements that Ridley Scott brought together in this particular film, and why it worked in ways that its imitators did not. The film also had a significant cultural impact beyond its immediate box office success. It reintroduced the ancient Roman world to a global popular audience in a way that generated genuine interest in Roman history, Roman culture, and Roman philosophy. Sales of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations reportedly increased significantly following the film's release. Academic courses on Roman history saw increased enrollment. Books about gladiatorial combat, Roman society, and the historical figures depicted in the film found new audiences. Gladiator did what the best historical films always do: it made the past feel alive and relevant and worth knowing about, and it sent people away from the cinema wanting to learn more about the world it had shown them. The film's cultural impact extended into areas that its makers had not anticipated. The image of Russell Crowe as Maximus, the stoic warrior who refuses to be broken by injustice and who carries his honor through circumstances that would destroy a lesser person, became a genuine cultural touchstone. The character and the film's central themes of honor, duty, resilience, and the refusal to let power corrupt you resonated far beyond the entertainment context in which they were originally presented. The film has been referenced and discussed in contexts ranging from military leadership training to political philosophy to sports psychology, because the story it tells about what it means to remain true to your values under extreme pressure is a story that connects with something deep and universal in human experience. The question of historical accuracy in Gladiator is a fascinating one because the film occupies an interesting middle ground between genuine historical engagement and dramatic invention. The core historical framework of the film is reasonably sound. Marcus Aurelius was a real emperor who died in 180 AD during the Germanic campaign. Commodus was a real person who was genuinely unstable, and who did have an extraordinary obsession with gladiatorial combat. The Colosseum was a real structure that hosted exactly the kind of spectacles the film depicts. The political tensions between the emperor and the Senate were genuine features of Roman political life. The institution of slavery and the gladiatorial system are portrayed with reasonable fidelity to the historical reality. But the specific story of Maximus is a dramatic invention. There was no general named Maximus Decimus Meridius who was betrayed by Commodus and became a gladiator seeking revenge. The film borrows elements from several real historical figures, including a real general named Narcissus who was involved in the conspiracy that eventually killed Commodus, and a gladiator named Maximus who fought in the arena during the period of Commodus's reign, combining and transforming them into the fictional character that Russell Crowe inhabits. The death of Commodus in the film is also dramatically invented. He was not killed in the arena in single combat with a gladiator. He was strangled in his bath as part of a palace conspiracy. These dramatic inventions do not diminish the film's historical value. What Gladiator does extraordinarily well is convey the texture and the feeling and the moral atmosphere of the Roman world in ways that are genuinely illuminating. The political dynamics it depicts, the relationship between the emperor and the Senate, the use of public spectacle as political currency, the moral framework of Stoic philosophy, the social reality of slavery and gladiatorial combat, the aesthetic of Roman military culture. All of these are rendered with enough fidelity to the historical record to give viewers a genuine sense of what this world was actually like, even as the specific story being told within that world is a fictional construction. The enduring power of Gladiator as a cultural artifact lies precisely in this combination. It takes a real and extraordinary historical moment, the end of the era of the 5 good emperors and the beginning of Rome's long decline, and it tells a human story within that moment that is universal in its emotional truth, even if it is fictional in its specific details. It asks questions about justice and power and honor, and what we owe to the people we love and to the society we are part of that are as relevant today as they were in 180 AD. And it does all of this with a visual grandeur and an emotional intensity that make it impossible to watch without being genuinely moved. That combination of historical grounding, universal human themes, and cinematic magnificence is what makes Gladiator not just a great film, but a genuinely important cultural document. The Roman Empire that Gladiator depicts has been gone for 15 centuries, but the questions it was grappling with at the moment the film depicts, questions about the nature of power, about the relationship between the individual and the state, about what it means to live and die with honor, about whether justice is possible in a world where the powerful can do as they wish, are questions that human beings have never stopped asking and will never stop asking. That is why this story, set 2,000 years ago in a world almost entirely unlike our own, continues to resonate with audiences around the world with a force and an immediacy that shows no sign of diminishing. Thank you so much for making it all the way through this deep dive into the cultural and historical world of Gladiator. This is the kind of content that takes real time and real effort to put together, and if you found any value in it, please hit that like button right now because it genuinely makes a difference to this channel. Share this video with someone who loves history or someone who loves Gladiator and wants to understand it at a deeper level. And if you want more content like this, more deep and serious explorations of the history and culture behind the greatest films ever made, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you never miss what comes next. See you in the next one.